So it was brought down last week in the Parsha of Beshalach that the Jewish people confronted the Amalekites. At the same time, in the real world, in our current day existence, which may or may not be more real than that offered in the Torah, there was a victory against the Amalekites, against the far-right, fascist, Zionist government. And the Torah offers a few instructions in terms of how to contend with them and how to move forward. The Jews were contended with two enemies during last week's Parsha. One is the enemy from Egypt, the enemy from behind, the enemy hot in pursuit, and there is the enemy ahead, after crossing the sea, the Amalekites, who want the complete destruction of the Jews. And they made the Jews vulnerable to further attack. Now you can argue that who is the Amalekites? Are they Hamas or are they Netanyahu's government? And I would venture to say that it's both. It's both these people. I think Amalekite ideology corresponds roughly with far-right ideologies in general. And here's why. The people of Amalek came from the people of Esav. Esav was the ancestor of the Roman people. Esav was the brother of Jacob. He was the older brother. Jacob gave birth to the Jewish people. Esav gave birth to the Roman people. And as if that's not bloody enough, one of his progeny was Amalek. And you can see this connection in terms of recent socio-political history, that America, before the war, was a great supporter of Germany. And even after the war, they share many things in common, especially in the areas of war, which the Torah rightly predicts that Esav is very interested in war, America is very interested in war. Except that Amalekite is a much more sinister version. And how did Amalekite came about? It came about because of rejection of a convert called Timnah. She wanted to marry into the family of Abraham, more particularly into the holy side of Abraham, which is the side of Jacob. But she was turned down. She is a genuine convert, but she was turned down. And what happened thereafter is that she joined the family of Esav, better on the side of unholiness and still part of Esav than none at all. And she was only concubine to the son of one of the sons of Esav, Eliphaz. And she gave birth to Amalek. So we see a connection between the rejection of the convert, the immigrant, of the outsider, of the stranger, and the rise of Amalekite ideas. So that's the second evidence to support that the idea of the Amalekite is related to far-right ideologies in general. And the third reason has to do with there is one place in the Gemara that connects the people of Amalek as being residing in Germania. This is a 2,000-year-old document. And the claim is that Amalekites resided in Germania. They were the equivalent of the barbarians that the Romans fought constantly. And that culture permeates until today. I mean, all these ancient cultures still have their echoes. And in fact, maybe they haven't changed much at all. There's nothing new under the sun. And so these forces, these far-right forces, whether it's Hamas or far-right Zionist governments, are things to combat. They are legitimate targets of contention. The Rebbe in the Sikha said that there are two types of enemies, and the Torah is not always consistent in terms of what enemies to contend with, what not. Sometimes the best thing to do is to remain silent, and yet there are other times when it's necessary to engage in conflict or engage in battle, engage in struggle, whatever the case may be. In the case of the Egyptians, the idea is to be silent and let God fight for you. But in the case of the Amalekites, which last week famously had Joshua fighting the Amalekites, winning, with Moshe and his companions lifting his hands, and as long as his hands were elevated, they were undefeated. And from last week's combat, we also take another lesson. Not only that we must actively fight fascism, but that last week it wasn't a total victory. The Amalekites were not completely obliterated. And there were several instances where the Jewish people failed to completely obliterate Amalekite. And of course, Amalekite here, again, is not necessarily a people, not necessarily a person, although can very much be embodied in people like Hitler, but far-right ideologies in general. And so we've won an important victory, but the fight is far from over. The fight of Amalek and his brother Esav, or his really grandfather Esav, very much still interlinked, still playing a role spiritually in this world, and we must press on.